Good afternoon, everybody. I am not the First Minister of Scotland, but you're about to hear from him. So my name is Peter Matheson. I'm the Principal of the University of Edinburgh, and it's my great pleasure just to welcome you to the event today. This room is called the Dean's Room, and this hall is very much associated, in my mind, with graduation ceremonies. So normally we do graduations down in the main hall, and the stage party gets prepared up here. Today it's for a totally different event to hear about the First Minister's take on what is a very complicated set of world events, and we're very interested to hear what he's got to say. So I'm delighted to be able to host the event here. I do need to mention the Scottish Council for Global Affairs. So this is a body that the universities of Edinburgh, Glasgow and St Andrews were the founder members of, and they've been assisting with the convening of this event. But without further ado, it's my great pleasure to invite the First Minister of Scotland, the Right Honourable John Swinney, MSP, to return to his alma mater and the room in the hall in which he graduated to talk to us about some very pressing current events. John, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining me here today. And Principal, it's as always a pleasure to be back at the University of Edinburgh and in very close proximity to the hall in which I graduated in 1986. So a pleasure to be with you today. I want to reflect this afternoon on the fundamental challenge facing Scotland in the light of what Mark Carney has described accurately, I believe, as a rupture in the world order. I want to do so by rooting our analysis in an understanding of our human reality that is primarily relational. No person is an island, and indeed, beyond its geography, no nation is an island. In essence, it is about how, in a fast-changing world, we maximise the independence of small and medium-sized powers by standing together, not by seeking to act alone. A collective independence that protects our values, ensures our prosperity, and provides the solid ground upon which we can stand in the face of the flash floods and storms of an emerging new world. As a guest of the University of Edinburgh, and given the issues that I will be addressing today, I can think of no better way to begin than by drawing our attention to a distinction offered by a great son of this university, a great European, and one of the most influential thinkers in my party and the wider Scottish independence movement, Professor Sir Neil MacCormack. In one of his landmark texts, Beyond the Sovereign State, Sir Neil spoke of the difference between politics and law, between power and order. As for politics, Neil wrote, I shall allow the late Aneurin Bevan's dictum that politics is about power. More exactly, politics is essentially concerned with the power of decision-making in human communities on matters of communal interest or importance, with competition for that power and with its exercise. As for law, the essence is not power, but normative order. Wherever there is law, there is normative order. Wherever there is normative order institutionalised, there is law. So that was the foundation of Sir Neil MacCormack's thinking. Law, the set of communal rules upon which we have agreed, places limits on power. That is, of course, the basis of the constitutional order we enjoy here at home. For 8 decades, it has been also the basis of the international order, the rules-based international order that, although imperfectly, has brought us peace and prosperity. The reality of power is not denied, but the exercise of power by politicians, even if imperfectly, is controlled. Today, I'll speak about both power and order and what that means for small and medium-sized nations. I will do so as the leader of a government that believes in independence in Europe for my nation, and also independence, that is meaningful strategic autonomy, including in defence, technology and energy, for Europe. Not so the European Union becomes merely an alternative power bloc in a world where only might is right, but rather as part of an alternative vision of a world sustained and built through partnership, and a partnership of equals, where the smallest sit at the same table as the strongest, and where their voice is heard. I want to be absolutely clear here. For the sake of our security and our prosperity, Scotland returning as swiftly as possible to membership of the European Union must be a core national priority and should be a shared national purpose. Scotland's power may be small, but our location in the world is significant, given that we sit at one end of the strategically important Greenland-Iceland-Scotland gap. We are the most northerly non-Arctic nation and have a role to play in the effective defence and sustainable development of the high north and the Arctic. We are a proud European nation and seek also to be a constructive and engaged global citizen. Stop the World, Scotland wants to get on, was not only a political slogan expressed powerfully by Winnie Ewing, who exemplified the outward-looking sentiments that I will talk of today, but it was also a statement of intent. It spoke to who we are and what we want to become. If we could stop the world, perhaps we could also rewind the world, taking us back to before Brexit, in the hope that we could change that particular choice. But of course, we must face the world as it is, and not the world as we wished it could be. And that is a world where, last week, because of President Trump's threats in relation to Greenland, there was a real concern that next week the United States and Europe would be engaged in an open trade war. Let us be clear, it is thanks to a resolute response from across Europe, through NATO and the EU, that the threat of tariffs, in effect economic sanctions wielded in order to force through a change in international borders, was removed. It was an unprecedented action by an ally, yes, but one more than matched by something more familiar. We saw a powerful and unified response that produced results, with the nations of Europe standing firm behind fundamental principles of sovereignty and self-determination. On 2 occasions now, in less than a year, the threat of a transatlantic trade war, with all the damage it would do to jobs, family incomes, and the wider economy, has been a real possibility. But it is about more than trade. The foundations upon which we have built so much have been shaken in a way that I never ever thought possible. And yes, cracks have appeared. Cracks that tell us those foundations need urgently to be rethought and renewed. After the turbulence of last week, it is only natural for all of us to feel a profound sense of relief that the worst of our fears did not unfold. And I think that sense of relief in itself tells a story. It reminds us of just how important our relationship with the United States actually is. We are kin, literally, in the case of the President, and our ties of friendship are deep. But in these times of uncertainty and of change, old assumptions must be replaced with new understandings, and that makes this a moment of profound challenge to address. In the midst of last week's events, the Chancellor Rachel Reeves made the comment in Davos that Britain will not be buffeted around. But as Mark Carney's Davos speech so eloquently analysed, that is exactly the fate that awaits those who fail to see and fail to prepare for the new reality that confronts us. Right now, Britain's place in the world, Britain's choices, leave Scotland more vulnerable. Because of Brexit, Britain is diminished. Because of Brexit, being buffeted around is exactly Britain's fate. An insular attitude has separated us from our nearest neighbours, leaving us unnecessarily and dangerously exposed. A return to the EU should not be seen merely as a knee-jerk response to the current context. This year marks 10 years since the Brexit referendum, and year on year the scale of the Brexit disaster becomes more apparent. Bit by bit, Britain is being broken by a Brexit that has left families worse off, that has meant less money available to invest in public services like the NHS. The price we are paying is real, the damage accumulating. We are poorer outside the EU. We are less safe outside the EU. While the improvement in the EU's relations with the UK is welcome, a response that is nothing more than closer alignment or a mere reset of relationships, or even a new customs union, but not the customs union, is no way sufficient. Not for the first time. The people are way ahead of the politicians on this simple truth, on this reading of our new reality. Polling in both Scotland and across the UK points to that fact. But the truth is that a Westminster that too willingly dances to the tune of the very forces that extracted us from the EU is not capable of taking Britain back into Europe. And so Scotland does face a choice. Periods of change can also be the periods of greatest clarity and greatest opportunity. When so much of the world is in flux, when so much is moving, that which is fixed and steady, that which is most fundamental, becomes clear. Now, I've spent most of my time so far this afternoon speaking about the importance of restoring Scotland's relationship with the European Union. But there are other lessons to be learned as we navigate our nation's next steps. One is that even as the old order changes, it is vitally important to hold on to those principles which have served us well. The UN is a creation of the post-war order, and it reflects in its structures the power balances of a previous age. It is in need of reform to give due recognition to the realities of size and power of this modern age. But that must not mean the creation of alternative global power structures that effectively undermine the UN. On this basis, let me be specific. The United Kingdom should be clear that it cannot and will not join the Board of Peace. Both the atrocities committed by Hamas and the response of Prime Minister Netanyahu and his government in Gaza confirm the necessity for a global legal order. Laws on genocide exist for good reason, but their existence on their own is not enough. We need also international courts capable of identifying and prosecuting all and any crimes of war and crimes against humanity. Powers must be exercised within a robust legal order. That is what is best for the world as a whole, a global interest that we must stand firmly behind. But there is also a national interest, and I'm very conscious that what is in the national interest of the UK is not always in the national interest of Scotland. An independent Scotland would, quite rightly, have the ability to and would make different choices. Our worldviews overlap in many important ways, as you would expect. But unlike the UK, Scotland has no need and no desire to project power on a global stage. While Britain may choose to spend billions of pounds on nuclear weapons, that is a choice. That is not a choice any Scottish government would make. Like our Nordic neighbours and peers, an independent Scotland would seek to contribute to collective defence as a member of NATO, and in doing so, take responsibility for the proper defence of the strategically important waters and airspace around our shores. And as the far north opens up, a northern nation like Scotland is well placed to play her part. It does not require a long memory to recall that the UK, while increasing investment in nuclear bombs, chose to scrap its entire maritime patrol fleet and its replacement. The United Kingdom has chosen not to base a single offshore patrol vessel, frigate or destroyer in Scotland, requiring vessels to be dispatched from the south coast of England when the flagship of the Russian Northern Fleet arrived off Scotland. As the new head of the Secret Intelligence Service, Blaise Messerwili, reflected last month, we are now operating in a space between peace and war. And it's the sort of hybrid war which requires adequate, multi-layered naval capability in Scottish waters to protect our offshore energy assets, to protect our underwater cables, and adequate air defences in Scotland to deal with threats to our airports, as happened across Northern Europe, from drones. An independent Scotland would not leave these gaps. Instead, the UK prioritises weapons that offer nothing in the face of actual day-to-day threats and which do not deserve the description of being independent. Westminster politicians may desire the power to destroy the planet, but for a Scottish Government, the priority would be the adequate defence of our waters and our shores. And just as it is in our national interest to be a reliable partner in regional defence, so too is it in our national interest to be a responsible partner on the global stage, whether for peace or for climate action. While some governments, including the UK government, choose to reduce spending on international development, the Scottish Government I lead, currently as a devolved government or as an independent government, will continue to make a different choice. Some describe international development investment as an expression of soft power, but it's way more significant than that. It is about global solidarity. It is about simply doing what is right. For decades, nations in the industrial West have profited from a global economic system that transfers wealth and resources away from the poorest nations to the wealthiest nations. We've pumped millions of tonnes of carbon into our atmosphere, with the price being paid the most right now in island nations in the Pacific, in sub-Saharan states in Africa. Climate justice has been at the heart of Scotland's international climate action, and it will remain so. Failure to act will be fatal for millions across our planet, because climate change unleashed will add to global inequality. It will exacerbate polarisation and force millions to flee their homes because of an ever-increasing threat of drought, flood and famine. It will mean ever more extreme weather events and rising seas, and threatening the loss of coastal towns and cities. No country on its own, no matter how powerful or influential, can protect the planet. No idealised system of laws or rules on its own can change the way we, countries, communities, businesses, universities, individuals, behave. I spoke at the beginning about the distinction between politics and law, between power and order. But it is a distinction not of opposites, of competing principles or forces. Rather, it's a distinction between two forces that complement each other, that require each other if they are to be most effective. The rules-based order, as we have known it, is not only a system of laws, but a system of relationships. It's a system that involves friends and foes and very clear power imbalances. That, for me, is one part of the explanation for the reality being somewhat different from the ideal. Yes, the rules-based system has never fully functioned as advertised, but even with its flaws, it has been a fundamental part of much of the progress that has been achieved. But in a world where the exercise of power becomes by far the dominant pole, the resulting tension is not one that produces an imperfect balance, but a tearing apart. The answer, however, is not to abandon hope or retreat behind our own walls. It is not to let institutions crumble, but to be the voices arguing for their value and, where necessary, their modernisation and their reform. In a changing world, with new challenges emerging, from climate change to questions around the role of AI, we need an international system with the confidence and the flexibility to adapt and evolve. And that is where organisations like the Scottish Council on Global Affairs have such an important part to play, so that Scotland's distinctive perspective, Scotland's particular needs and interests, are part of these very necessary global conversations. Some will argue that Scotland should let the UK speak on matters of world affairs. I say that Scotland should make her voice heard. We must not give up on cooperation, but be smart about it. Because even amidst the shifting sands of the current global order, collective action works. We saw European coordination and leadership in response to provocations around Greenland. And we continue to see it in response to Russian aggression, especially in relation to Ukraine. For Scotland, regional cooperation is vital. That includes cooperation on these isles, Whatever Scotland's constitutional future, England, Wales, Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland will form a distinct family of nations. It is cooperation across the North Sea on energy, for example, with Scotland well placed to contribute to Europe-wide efforts to ensure both energy transition and energy independence. It is cooperation to our north as a focused and reliable partner in NATO's defence of the High North and Arctic. And most importantly, it is cooperation at a European level as part of the EU, because have no doubt, countries in a regional bloc of the size and significance of the EU can achieve the same advantages of reach and scale as any superpower. The platform for security and prosperity that I set out for Scotland today, of partnership through NATO and the EU, is of course the approach followed by nations across Europe. And it is through initiatives also, such as the EU's Security Action for Europe, or SAFE programme. The EU member states are right now working together to enhance their defence and security capabilities. It is encouraging to see non-EU NATO members, such as Canada, choosing to engage with this project. And the more the UK and the Scottish defence sector can be involved, the better. This is a time when we should be redoubling our commitment to the European dimension of our defence, because small, medium and medium-sized nations working together, exercising their independence collectively, are less vulnerable to pressure, coercion or transactional threats wherever they come from. They are more able to collectively bargain, diversify and achieve economies of scale. For Scotland, Europe is obviously our geographic region. It is also our natural political and economic community. The EU's founding values, human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, rule of law and human rights align with our own. And so I repeat, in order to emphasise just how important this is for our nation's future, we need to deepen relationships with our like-minded neighbours in the EU, economically, politically, academically, institutionally, culturally. We need to work with them and with other like-minded countries globally to find new ways to practice the same internationalism that we value. Not to build up our own battlements, not to retreat behind a bigger set of walls, but because we believe in the vision offered by nation-states working together in a multinational partnership. Nation-states with their independence secured and enhanced through cooperation. For me, the European Union has always offered an inspirational model for the peaceful coexistence of states, an aspirational model of partnership designed to deliver prosperity and security, to foster friendship with power shared through key principles such as subsidiarity and solidarity. It provided us with a means to be good citizens globally, regionally, locally. To leave the EU was a fundamental error. The United Kingdom wanted control more than cooperation, isolationism rather than partnership. But the Brexit experiment has failed. The United Kingdom is not a superpower, it is an intermediate power. One, yes, with an advanced economy and significant military, intelligence and diplomatic assets behind it, but an intermediate power nonetheless. As a result, Brexit has been and will continue to be an unmitigated economic, political and societal disaster. It has served only to weaken Britain's standing and influence on the world stage. It has served only to decrease people's standard of living here at home. And that's why it's time for Scotland to choose a different path. With the world changing rapidly around us, the most prosperous future, the most secure future, is as a member state of the European Union. Of that, I have no doubt. I began this address this afternoon with a distinction offered by Professor Sir Neil MacCormack, and I will end by offering something of his vision. Sir Neil described the EU as a European Commonwealth, and that phrase encapsulates so much of what the European project has been about. We are all in it together. We have to give something up, some of the sovereignty that we hold as individual nations. But in return, we get something way more important, way more significant. What the European Union has achieved is remarkable. A continent riven by wars, brought to the very precipice of disaster, where in the Holocaust, evil flourished in the most inhumane of ways, became instead a beacon of peace and shared prosperity. Nations' prospects transformed. We only have to look west to Ireland to see that truth. Nations' independence valued and protected from the Baltic to the Balkans. In a world where hope is in short supply, where the dominant forces seem to be all about pulling us apart, Europe offers a powerful alternative, indeed, a powerful antidote. Scotland is a European nation, and I hope soon that Scotland will become the EU's newest member state. Thank you very much. I'm going to take some questions on what I've covered today. First of all, from three of the broadcasters, and then I will come to the rest of the gathering here, and we can have some formal exchanges. So first of all, I'll come to Andrew Kerr of BBC Scotland. Andrew.
Thank you, First Minister. Now, you were talking about an independent Scotland, but actually when you look at an independent Scotland, perhaps pre-EU accession, would that not be more vulnerable than in the current setup? You also said cooperation is vital. We've got a statement from you and the Bella One in Parliament this afternoon. Opponents may say there's an element of hypocrisy there because you were happy for the captain and the crew to be kept by the Americans in Scottish waters, then anger at the Americans and the UK government when the captain is taken away, perhaps a moment you've seized to create a political argument, but be not much evidence of cooperation there. Thank you.
On your first point, Andrew, the whole premise of my address today has been about the importance of recognising the solidarity that independent nation states require in their work with other countries and to enable their security and their stability, and indeed, in relation to the EU, their prosperity, because of the significant decline in prosperity that's affected the United Kingdom since it left Brexit. So my fundamental argument today is about the importance of recognising the need for there to be collaboration amongst independent nations who can create stronger common purpose as a consequence of their willing to cooperate together. Taking their own decisions, yes, but cooperating with others on the issues of security, solidarity and prosperity. So that's why I think, particularly in these very turbulent times, the whole question of Scottish independence is ever more relevant for the needs and the interests of the people of Scotland to guarantee their prosperity, their safety and their security. Now, in relation to the issue of the Bella One, I'll make a statement to Parliament later on this afternoon, because there have been some important issues raised about the role and the conduct of the Scottish Government. And I think it's important that I am open with Parliament about these questions and that I address these issues that are made. I resile from nothing that I've said about the importance of sanctions being enforced where sanctions are applied. So the actions to ensure the Bella One is not breaking sanctions is, in my view, absolutely justifiable. There are, of course, questions that have been posed about the actions of my government, so it's important that I express those to Parliament. And you'll understand, of course, that parliamentary rules mean that I've got to say that to Parliament first, which is what I'll do later on this afternoon. Gina Davison. Gina.
Thanks, First Minister. In your speech there, you said that old assumptions must be replaced with new understandings when it comes to international relations, perhaps with former allies, current allies, including the US. You didn't mention China at all in this. The Prime Minister is obviously going out there. did you not mention China for a reason? Are you concerned that maybe doing so might, bring an issue around the Mingyang investment that you're hoping goes ahead? And secondly, can I ask, a lot of discussion in your speech about defence in an independent Scotland. You have been criticised for not supporting defence jobs in Scotland currently, particularly when it comes to the manufacture of munitions. Is that something that would change?
Well, on that point, I made a statement to Parliament in early September, which set out a change in the government's position in relation to the question of support to companies involved in munitions, but applied the important caveat which has got to govern all of the decisions that the Scottish Government takes, is that we have to be satisfied that our decisions have been taken in accordance with international law. So, given the issues of concern about the conduct of the Israeli government in Gaza, I made it clear in that statement that companies associated with the production of munitions and activities in relation to the conflict of Gaza would, we would not be able to support ventures of that type. So that's us exercising. I think there are two key points in that respect. One, recognising the changing geopolitical realities that require us to have ever more attention to our defence footprint. But secondly, recognising that there is a question in relation to international law that we have to address in relation to what has happened in Gaza, and for that reason there is a caveat in our policy approach. In relation to China, I think we have to have an approach towards China that takes into account both the opportunities to collaborate economically, but the need to ensure that we take the necessary actions to, as in all of these trade discussions, to protect our national interests and our national security. And that is a careful and sensitive balance to strike, but it's a balance that is unavoidable and inescapable. The issue, obviously, we await, there's consideration being given to an investment proposition from Mingyang, which requires the authorisation of the United Kingdom Government. We don't yet have an answer on that question, and we await an answer on that question, and I'm keen to make sure that we get an answer to that question sooner rather than later, as it's been dragging on for quite some time. Alan Smith from Bauer. Alan? No, are you...
Just on the unequivocal on the UK not joining the Board of Peace today, when you were asked about that last week, the weren't clear. So I wondered if there was anything that's happened in the previous few days that's made you come to that more clearer position on that. And the second one, just on security, particularly in the north of Scotland. Obviously, communities there will see jets being scrambled from Lossy Mount, see use of the airport, see the Russian tanker in the muddy park. What do you think the UK government could be doing to protect communities in the north of Scotland?
On the Board of Peace question, I have set out, I've always been a long-standing supporter of international institutions to provide the necessary framework for the assurance of peace and stability. And I think it's clear that we've got institutions that can do that can enable that role to be performed through the United Nations. But there is a need to recognise that those have to be made ever more effective, and they have to reflect the world as it is today. So I think the Board of Peace runs contrary to that, which is why I think we should put our efforts into strengthening the international institutions that can serve us well. And then in relation to the question of security, I hope it's clear from what I've said the importance I attach, given the very changed geopolitical situation that we find ourselves in now, that we have to have a very close attention and focus on the security of our country and all of our communities. And in the geographical significance of Scotland and the positioning of Scotland is critical in that respect, not just for our own domestic interests, because we are surrounded by a very extensive coastline, but because of the interactions of our coastal waters with many other jurisdictions and areas of activity in the north, the approach to the Arctic, in the North Atlantic. So I think it's important that we signal the significance we attach to that collaboration and that cooperation around these areas, so that we are not only protecting ourselves, but we are contributing to the protection and the well-being of our neighbours and those who may be vulnerable to threats from external parties. And that's a founding element of the perspective I'm setting out here to you today, of the importance of enabling and encouraging that collaboration and that security. So that's all the broadcast questions. I'll deal with the print media later on, but I'll take some other questions from the audience. Yes. I think there's one coming. Just
Thank you, First Minister. I really appreciate your ideas on internal and international issues. Bulgaria is very happy and thankful to UK for the support 3 decades ago to join NATO and the European Union. And I myself will be one of the happiest persons when this road back will be finalized. And I wish you full success in this direction. My question is talking about independence. Can you elaborate a little bit on the issue on Barrett formula and the voices from Cardiff for reform? For me, this is a step forward to the independence. Thank you.
Obviously, the financial arrangements of the United Kingdom are, well, we can see what they are just now. They are the arrangements that are in place. My argument about independence is that what it provides us with the opportunity to do is to use the resources and the decision-making capability of Scotland to create the strongest economy, the strongest platform for economic activity and increased economic performance as a consequence of exercising those powers of independence. So the arrangements around the Barnett formula are very much a product of the existing current constitutional arrangements. I'm keen to make sure that we have the ability to use new constitutional arrangements under independence to ensure that Scotland is a prosperous nation and able to use the wealth of our country, principally our energy wealth, to enhance the lives of people in Scotland and enhance the opportunities of people and businesses in Scotland. And that is particularly apposite in relation to energy, where the cost of energy is a significant factor in undermining the prosperity and the opportunity for people in Scotland. Other questions? Yes. There's a microphone coming your way.
Thanks very much, First Minister. It's Gavin Sullivan at Edinburgh Law School. And I think, the argument about greater collaboration between smaller independent nations and fostering closer ties, strengthening the rules-based order, I think on that we can all agree that that's an important thing that we need to do in the current geopolitical moment. What wasn't much discussed, and that's where my question is coming in, is about what I would call the infrastructural dimension of the current geopolitical crisis that we're in. So, for example, many of the problems we're now confronted with aren't simply a reassertion of the US hegemony of the past in global politics, but they're expressed through the weaponization of infrastructure, financial infrastructure, digital infrastructure in particular, that maximizes asymmetries between countries in the world stage. So I guess my question is, and the vulnerability here is that our financial and security infrastructure remains deeply enmeshed with US power, with US-based firms in the AI race, whether it's AI platforms or big tech platforms that we're currently articulating our national move towards AI through. So my question really is about what kind of infrastructural initiatives and developments can we do to maximize our independence, to complement the security and the security and economic vision which you launched today? Because the fear, of course, is that if we don't articulate and if we simply double down on on the importance of multilateralism and closer ties, we miss the critical ways through which infrastructural control is being practiced in the present. Thanks.
I think there's part of what I tried to do in my speech, Gavin, was to make the argument and the distinction between essentially a retreat into a concept whereby, if I follow the points that you made in your own contribution there, where all these things are exclusively, unreservedly under our own control as a nation, because that's the only way that you can essentially address the question that you put to me. Between that as a concept and recognising the advantages of multilateral engagement, where there is respect for the position of different independent countries within that collaboration. And that's where I think the European Union has been enormously successful, because the balances within the European Union of respect for the position of smaller countries, for example, versus the position of larger countries, has actually created, and I cited the reliance on the principles of solidarity and subsidiarity. And to me, that's the most powerful testament of the example of the European Union, that it's been possible to create a cohesive Commonwealth, as Sir Neil MacCormick called it, of countries large and small, bound together by shared values and also bound together by respect for concepts such as subsidiarity and solidarity, so that there is a cohesion as a consequence of those efforts. And if you look at the EU SAFE programme, it's an example of taking that into a different sphere, of really entrenching or extending some of that activity. And that, to me, feels like the alternative to that sense of we just have to do everything ourselves. Because if we just do everything ourselves, I think I'm signalling that I recognise that there is a shared endeavour. There is a partnership necessity in the world as we live in it today, and that has to be reflected in some of these judgments. Thank you. Yes.
Julian Jones, Honorary Consul General for Norway. First Minister, I think we would all agree with you strongly that Scotland has considerable economic opportunities in the energy sector, but I wondered whether you might want to speculate on other possible opportunities, and one which occurred to me is Scotland's strength in critical technologies, particularly with small companies. I guess there are probably two questions here. One is, which do you think would be the technologies which represent the greatest degree of opportunity, economic opportunity for Scotland in the future? And also, given the kinds of international change which you mentioned to us, which are the international relationships we have where probably the opportunities are diminishing and there may be risk, and which are the international opportunities where the opportunity is growing and perhaps we should look at more closely. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
Thank you. In relation to our economic strengths, you cited the strength in energy, and I think it's pretty well developed and demonstrated. I've just spent a couple of days in London. I was just agreeing on Monday evening a renewed partnership between the Scottish Government and the City of London in relation to the development of financial services. And one of the points I was two of the points I was commending was the very significant growth in asset management capability within Scotland, but then also the very significant attractiveness of Scotland as a location for financial services activity because of the partnerships with our universities, and the university being central to many of the reasons why BlackRock, for example, has located in this city and expanding significantly, but very relevant also in Glasgow, with JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley and Barclays as very significant expanded operations. So financial services is another example. I think in given where I am today, I can't possibly not talk about the computing strengths of the University of Edinburgh and the enormous capacity and capability of encouraging and motivating more developments in that respect. And I think that's where the technologies of the future lie. And of course, one of the key strengths that we are developing in partnership with our university colleagues is ensuring that the research power of our universities is deployed very strongly to support the developments within the Scottish economy, and in that area we have really substantial partnerships. Now, in relation to your question about, where are our economic relationships, where have they been and where are they going? I want the Scottish economy to be an open economy. I want us to be engaged in international economic activity. I want us to be operating across a range of different partnerships. I think we've done economic harm to ourselves by what was decided about Brexit. So I think restoring our relationships with the European Union is and easing trade flows and business flows is fundamental to the agenda we've got to take forward. The relationships with the United States are, have some volatility about them because of tariffs. And, my stance in relation to the activity I've taken forward in relation to whisky tariffs has been, clearly expressed about the fact that there is real damage being done to the industry in Scotland as a consequence of the tariffs. So we need to try to get to a position where we remove these obstacles. But these are just some of the opportunities and challenges that we face in the current context. Okay. Yes.
Thank you. It's Erica Boak, EU Education Director from the British Council. In terms of boosting Scotland's prosperity, what role do you see closer people-to-people and institutional links with the EU playing? I suppose I'm thinking about Erasmus Plus and other schemes.
Well, there's obviously welcome news that Erasmus has been, that we're way forward on Erasmus. I had a very constructive discussion yesterday with the EU ambassadors to the United Kingdom in London, and we were talking about, I was setting out the importance I attach to those, to the whole question of youth mobility and to collaboration between institutions, because I think it has been, if I look at the benefits that have been experienced under many of these programmes and these opportunities, our institutions in Scotland and the opportunities in Scotland were strengthened. That becomes more tricky, challenging post-Brexit. But I think the development of student exchange, institutional partnership and cooperation is a really significant opportunity to come out of the direction of thinking that I'm setting out today. And I think our institutions have worked really hard to try to minimise the damage that has clearly been done by Brexit. But obviously, were we to be in a different position as an independent member of the European Union, we would have more opportunity to advance some of those areas of cooperation, and I think we would be the better for it. Yes.
Thank you very much, First Minister, for this very interesting speech. My name is Tanja Bultmann. I'm a professor of migration history at the University of Strathclyde. Once, if I may just quickly add, an Erasmus student in this institution. I was hoping that we could perhaps connect the comments you made about obviously national security, international geopolitical developments a little bit to challenges that have triggered some of these. And that brings me to my field, which is migration history and migration generally. What I mean is we have these kind of conversations in Scotland and all around the world around migration and the movements of people, and this is what's a real driver in the polarisation that we are now seeing kind of express itself in the new geopolitics of our world. So I guess what I'm asking is Scottish Government looking at this in the round and to also kind of try and address this from sort of spilling out in Scotland itself. So we know there are anti-immigrant sentiments here, and they are growing. There's data on this that makes that very clear. And this is clearly connected to everything you've discussed today, because that's what's been driving some of these changes in the US and in our global conversation. One example, and you may have seen this the other day, the UK government has a study that it kind of was trying to hide perhaps a little bit, which is really on the ecosystem, the breakdown of the ecosystem. But in that, migration and questions around that, the polarisation these questions are causing today is described as a national security challenge as well, for example. So I suppose I'm just asking, are we connecting the dots? Are we looking at this in the round? What might civil society do here to help mitigate some of these challenges also becoming more prominent in Scotland? I appreciate that's a bit of a parallel question to what you were talking about, but I think it's all connected.
I think it's very connected to what I'm talking about, and I think there's probably I think three elements that I would draw on to link this together. The first is that I think there is a very practical argument to be made about migration about Scotland, which is the fact that we face significant challenges about the size of our working age population. And we make these arguments to the Migration Advisory Service and the United Kingdom Government about trying to get into an arrangement where we might have distinctive migration policies able to be applied within Scotland. We've not had a positive result to that discussion, but it won't stop us trying. So, in citing that example, there is a practical reason why, and a practical argument to be made about the necessity for migration within Scotland. And indeed, many of the issues that we faced about, if I go back over 20 years, these issues were being confronted about the size of the labour market, and the Scottish executive at the time made a case to the UK government to be able to exercise a distinctive migration approach through the Fresh Talent Initiative. It was the necessity of it was diminished by the fact that EU expansion and freedom of movement largely took account of the need there, but there was a beneficial flow which helped our economy. It reduced the shortages of people that we're experiencing. So there's a rational argument for taking that forward. The second point is a more strategic argument, again, which is reflected in my government's priorities around about international development. In October, I was in Malawi, and I went to visit a project that the Scottish Government is funding in the province of Zomba. And it was an agricultural project, and it was essentially to provide pump infrastructure, the ground source pump infrastructure powered by solar power to enable irrigation in the fields. Why? Because climate change meant that this land, which had previously been very fertile, was literally unable to be cultivated. And as I talked to villagers about the difference of what this had all meant, it illustrated to me some of the dilemmas that you're raising. If we hadn't contributed to that international development, these people would either have died there or they would have had to move because they lost their ability to use the land for their benefit. So it was an incredibly powerful illustration to me of the value of international development and trying to enable people to live lives in the areas which they were connected. So there's an international development aspect which is reflected in my government's priorities, although I have to say that, again, 20 years ago, there was no debate about international development being a good thing. Well, there is now, sadly, very sadly, in my humble opinion. And then the last element that I would weave together is about the messages that we send out in our political leadership and in our campaigning. And I communicate a message which is that I think Scotland benefits from the migration that we experience and that we need to be positive about that. And we need to also work very hard to maintain cohesion within our communities so that people feel very much part of this society and able to be together. And I think some of those three elements I hope addresses the very important point that you put to me. I'm going to take one last question and then we'd better close up. Yes, just there, thanks.
Thank you, First Minister. The values we find in Scotland in the EU can also be found outside of Europe, say, for example, in Canada, who you mentioned in your speech. Your argument for your desired relationship between Scotland and the EU is, quite rightly, in my view, predicated upon the commonality of those values. So how would you handle an independent Scotland's relationship with nations like Canada, not European, but with very similar values? Do you see it being exactly the same as with Europe or different? And if so, why would it be different?
I think there will be, I suppose there'll be more, I think the best way to maybe address that is to talk about more intense areas of activity than others. So I would view our collaboration with European countries being at the most intense because, as I said in my comments, that is our geographical regional reality. But that should never be in any way an alternative to working with those whose values we share. And I had the Honorary Consul of Canada is here today, and I had a very enjoyable conversation on Monday evening with the Deputy High Commissioner of Canada, talking about many of these issues when I was in London earlier on this week. So I think there are, what I hope I've conveyed today is the importance I attach to Scotland being an outward-looking, engaged, cooperative country as an independent country. That is where our future lies. And yes, we will share that most intensely with those around about us. The countries of these islands, I've referred to England, Wales, Northern Ireland, Scotland, the Republic of Ireland, all always being in an intense friendship and collaboration. That is also relevant in Europe, but there'll be other countries we can cooperate with, and I'm certain Canada is one of them. Okay, thank you all very much. It's a pleasure to see you today, and thank you very much for your engagement. I look forward to a chat over coffee. Thank you very much. Thank you.